Hello, everyone. This is Ali MK Hindi, and this week we're continuing on our series From Chaos to Clarity, the literature review process. So, we've gone through deciding on the type of review. We then talked about the importance of developing a search strategy, which is the base, the core of your review. Last week, we went over selected information sources, so the most efficient way of gathering relevant data for your review. And this week, we're going to go over data extraction. So at this point, you've gathered the papers that you're going to include in your review. So you've got your 5, 10, 30, however many papers you want to include. Where do you go from here? And that's where a data extraction form comes into play, as well as the importance of critically appraising these papers, particularly if you're doing a systematic review. So what is a data extraction form? It's nothing complicated. It's basically a way of systematically gathering key information from the research articles that you included in your review. Why do we use a data extraction form? Standardization. So it helps standardize the process. If you have a form for data extraction and you're adhering to this form for all of the studies that you included. Organization, that goes without saying. Efficiency, it makes life easier when you have a form and you're populating it with data from your included studies. Quality assessment, so some of these forms already have a quality assessment aspect to them. If not, you add it onto it. And I think this one's really important, transparency and reproducibility. So when you have this form, data extraction form, other people can see how you extracted data from those included papers and how you came to the conclusions that you did in your review. So what should a data extraction form include? The first thing I want to get out there is a no one-size-fits-all data extraction form. So, which we're going to go over in a bit. You can find some templates, but it's very hard to find a template that's going to cover all your needs because every literature review is unique. And what you include is going to depend on, the type of review you're doing, the type of studies you're including in your review, the nature of your research question, and so on. But generally speaking, this is what a data extraction form should cover. Study identification, so the author, year, the country or location which the papers are published, some aspect of the study design and method, so what kind of study design was used, participants, what kind of participants were included, was there inclusion-exclusion criteria for that, sample, how was the sample size determined, recruitment, and so on. Intervention exposure, if applicable. Once again, for a qualitative review, this won't apply, but same thing for outcome measures. So what were the outcome measures for this study? Key findings, I think that's really important. So you're going to summarize what are the key findings relevant to my literature review question that I want to put in that data extraction form. And then if you're doing a systematic review, a quality assessment aspect should be included. So while I said there isn't a one-size-fits-all, there are pre-made templates out there that you could adopt. So the one that I'm going to use for the illustration purposes is the one from the Cochrane. You can just download it online. They have a data collection form. But see, they kind of mention or reiterate the same thing that I'm going. So just use it as a guide for developing your own data extraction form. Sections can be expanded and added, and irrelevant sections can be removed. So as I said, use this as a guide to make your own data extraction form. You don't need to follow it religiously because there might be things that are irrelative to your review. So I'm not going to populate this form, otherwise this will be like a 20-minute video. But basically, you go over the form, and then from each study you included, you kind of fill in these boxes. So what kind of study was it? What was it? Wow. Aim of that study, design, unit of allocation, might not apply to this kind of study you're doing. And you keep doing this for each study up until you've done it for every study. And then once you've done that for all of the studies, so just to briefly go down, it's quite a long data extraction form. So once you've done that for all of the studies, you can then put it all in an Excel spreadsheet, and that becomes sort of your data extraction form. So as I mentioned earlier, as part of the data extraction form, you'd want to do a critical appraisal of each of the included studies, and you can put that as a column in your data extraction form. Now, the common question I always get asked is which critical appraisal tool? There are a lot of critical appraisal tools, but you should go for some of the commonly used ones. So for illustrative purposes, you could use, for example, JBI. They have different critical appraisal tools depending on what kind of study. You just go on their website. You can, for example, if I was doing qualitative research and I would download it. There's also the CASP, which is depending on which kind of study, you can download one of their Word documents and fill it in. A CASP, in my point of view, is a bit broad and generic. I'm not a big fan of it, but it gets the job done, and a lot of people use it. There's also, for example, the wrong Word document. There's also the Newcastle Ottawa scale. So, for example, if I was doing a case control study and I wanted to do a critical appraisal checklist, I would go over this one. So, basically, it's a checklist. You just run it through each study. Is the case definition adequate? If you give it a star for this one as well, and you just do it for everyone. And then there's a scoring element towards the end. So which critical appraisal tool shall I use? Once again, use a commonly used one, use one which is validated, and then it kind of depends on which one suits your review best. So, and I'm going to actually do a separate piece of content later this week about the different critical appraisal tools, and some of them are very specific, some of them are more broad, some of them are harder to use than others, and so on. So which one you use will depend on your literature review or systematic review. But yeah, that's pretty much in a nutshell the data extraction form process. Apologies, I couldn't do a very detailed video, because if I was to go through the process of populating a study on the form and put it on an Excel sheet, it will be a very, very long video. But that's something definitely to do for another day. But anyways, that concludes the video. So in a nutshell, we went over data extraction this week. Next week, we'll follow on about synthesis of results. So once you have your data extraction form, how do you move from a template to actually synthesis of results, where you're going to do the write-up and come up with your interpretation and conclusions and so on. Anyways, thank you for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give us a like, comment, repost, and all the cool stuff we do in LinkedIn. And see you next time.